Steam lifts from a cord-marked Jomon pot in delicate threads, each ribbon curling, purling, and sliding back along the warm clay like dew returning to a leaf spine. You smell chestnuts, briny fish, and wood smoke braided so gently that your shoulders fall a little without asking permission. Your fingers rest on the vessel's shoulder, damp, warm, alive in its own ceramic way, and you feel the low murmur of a simmer that refuses to hurry. You probably won't survive this if you crank the fire like a jet engine and expect ancient clay to applaud your enthusiasm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle by the hearth where lamp glow brushes the pot's corded skin, and the night becomes a workshop made of breath. The fire is small, considerate, 2 fingers tall, and the air moves through the doorway like wind across courtyards. Not a shove, just a suggestion. You tilt your ear, hearing how water speaks inside clay. Not a boil that shouts, a simmer that listens. When you lift the lid, kettle steam gathers along the rim, beads on cord terraces, and strolls home again to the broth. That stroll is your first lesson. Heat can be a walk, not a sprint. You begin with courtesy to the vessel. The pot isn't a stranger. You woke it earlier with a first steaming. Before trusting it with supper, you filled it with clean water and a handful of greens, striped kelp if the tide was kind, pine needles if the forest invited, and let it drowse at the fire's shoulder, not on the flame's tongue. The old maker's phrase returns, wake the pause, half chemistry, half charm, entirely useful. The warm, scented water found the micropaths in the wall, expanded and eased them, persuaded the clay to stretch like a yawn, rather than snap like a scolded branch. You poured that practice water onto the ashes with thanks. The pot remembered the kindness. So did you. You treat the base like a guest's back, supported in 3 places, never pinched. 3 stones cradle the skirt, because 3 points always agree even when the ground is indecisive. You leave 2 doorways in the hearth's ring where air can wander under the belly, little alleyways for convection to do what it loves without starting arguments. The ash layer below becomes a cushion that turns needle-hot specks into soft halos. If this sounds like physics, it is, but the bedtime version. Spread attention, avoid surprises. One clean fact sits comfortably beside the coals like a quiet friend. The cord-marked pottery we call Jomon, named for the very rope impressions your fingertips are tracing, appears deep in prehistory in the Japanese archipelago, with very early examples reaching back many thousands of years before bronze ever thought to visit. Keep the numbers light tonight. The important part is this. People boiled stews in clay here for ages without turning dinnerware into puzzles for future archaeologists. You rotate the pot a finger's width, no circus twirl, only a courtly turn, so heat does not fall in love with one patch of wall. You listen. The simmer's voice rounds out. A small joke keeps your jaw from clenching. If you treat clay like cast iron on espresso, you get instant archaeology. The pot, mercifully, does not take offense. It approves of your restraint by not making any cracking noises of doom, which is the kind of 5-star review you want at midnight. Your hands remember the day's choices along the river. Clays levigated until ripples in a gourd settled like a tired pond. Tempers of sand and grog folded in until the body promised to bend before it broke. You don't need the lab vocabulary, only the lullaby. Expansion spreads, stress shrugs, kindness holds. The chord marks under your thumb become micro-terraces, where condensate can bead and travel. Your grip is secure without squeezing. A second joke floats up with the steam. Smooth pots are charming liars. Corded pots tell the truth to wet hands. You check the lid again. Not a clamp, a guide. A flat clay disc and a broad leaf make a miniature weather system. Warm vapor rises, meets the lid, condenses into patient droplets, and returns to the stew as if it planned to all along. The leaf's veins nudge the drops toward the inner lip, where a shallow channel you stroked with a shell invites them home. Inside, flavors concentrate without scorching. Outside, the wall warms evenly without one jealous patch demanding attention. If the simmer begins to gossip too loudly, you slide a coal away with a stick and let silence fix what force would fumble. Your neighbors share this room of tasks. Someone taps a gentle drum cadence on a hollow log, soft enough to keep your hands from speeding, steady enough to keep you from forgetting. Another skims foam with the same patience used earlier to sieve clay. A child at the doorway becomes the breeze's translator, calling out when a gust gets ideas. No one guards the secret. The secret is manners, and manners, once seen, are contagious. A fringed tidbit returns with a grin. An older hand swore by a tongue truth test. Touch a dry test shard to your tongue. If it clings for a blink, the body is thirsty enough to welcome seasoning and hold kindness. If it falls away without interest, the surface may have closed too tight. You rolled your eyes the first time, then found yourself sneaking a lick when no one was watching. The shard obliged with a polite kiss. You apologized to the room and called it science. Everyone pretended not to laugh. You stir with the back of the ladle, never the edge, and scrape lightly where starch likes to settle. The motion is slow, like tracing ripples in a cistern, and waiting for the circle to widen without panic. You lift the ladle straight, avoiding the dramatic clack that rattles rims and tempers. The stew's breath evens out again. In lamp glow, the pot's shadow tells thickness stories. Darker where the wall carries more mass, lighter where your earlier paddling compressed the skin into a polite drum. You read those shadows like soft handwriting and rotate the vessel another finger. Historians still argue whether the very earliest cooks set pots directly in tongues of flame or mostly over bedded coals, whether the first recipes preferred seafood and nut pastes or leaned into something we'd now call tea and broth. You let the debate simmer beside you, useful but not bossy. Tonight you choose the middle temper, coals that glow, flames that stay shy, a rim that leans inward just enough to tame ambitious bubbles. If a burst threatens to escape, you lift the lid half a breath. The pot sighs, relieved. You put the lid back with a thank you. Outside, sandal crunch fades along the path. Inside, kettle steam keeps writing its quiet script along corded terraces. Clay dust from the afternoon's work still lives in your knuckle creases. You rub them together and watch a small galaxy appear and vanish. The room smells like smoke behaving itself. You breathe in through your nose for 4 heartbeats, out for 6, as if your lungs were the bellows of an invisible kiln that runs on patience. One last kindness. You never ask the pot to make sudden friends with winter or summer. When you add water, it is warm. When you move the vessel, you cradle the lugs low and steady, not like a parade drum. When you feed the fire, you feed it in syllables, not sentences. Clay likes grammar, periods and commas over exclamation points. The pot thanks you in the only way it can. It does not complain. It simmers. It endures. It turns simple things into supper without cracking under the small confusions of heat and time. By the time you taste with the spoon, the flavors have agreed on a story. The wall's warmth feels even under your palm, and the rim, modest as a doorway without a brag, holds its line. Outside, the night gathers itself. Inside, lamp glow writes soft edges on faces. The pot will make it through the meal and through many more, because you asked it to do the possible and taught the fire to be a friend. You lift the spoon again, let the steam rise against your cheek, and smile at the quiet proof that kindness is also a technique. Morning finds you following the river's slow elbow, sandal crunch soft on damp sand. The same hands that guided last night's simmer now hunting the earth that will survive tomorrow's. You walk where banks slump to show their secrets, bands of color like layers in a quiet cake, and you pinch what looks promising. A good pinch holds together like patient dough. A bad pinch crumbles like a shy cookie. You roll a pea-sized ball between thumb and forefinger. If it polishes into a tiny sheen without smearing into tantrum, you nod. You are not auditioning for Pottery's version of a cooking show. You are simply looking for clay that says, I can be kind to heat. You work with a shell and a short stick, lifting clay, letting pebbles clink and argue their way back to the river. A woven strainer waits in palm leaf shade, alongside two gourds, and a stone you kept because it fits your hand like thought. Clay dust blooms later in sunbeams like a small galaxy wobbling in a window. For now, you keep it damp enough to behave. It is easy to forget that yesterday's uncracked pot began in this mud, and easier still to think mud is simple. It isn't. It is a quiet parliament of platelets and grit and ghosts of shells, each with strong opinions about fire. You carry a basket up to a flat patch where wind across courtyards becomes a gentle draft off water. You tip the mass into a bowl and make slip, clay mixed with river water until it moves like slow cream. Levigation is a grand word for letting gravity sort your guests by manners. You stir, then let the ripples in the gourd settle like a cistern after a fingertip touch. Heavy sand drops first, silt after, clay last, water on top. You pour off the clear, save the creamy, and say a small thank you to the part of the universe that takes its time. You test as you go, roll a coil as thin as a reed and wrap it around your finger. If it cracks into a frown, the clay is short, and you comfort it by adding a whisper of slip from yesterday's better batch. If it survives the wrap with only tiny smile lines, you tuck that memory away. This earth will handle curves without sulking. A quick joke keeps your jaw loose. We are not making smoothies. You remind yourself as you stir. Over-mixing makes even good clay act clingy. One clean fact, light enough for morning. In this archipelago, pottery appears astonishingly early, what scholars call the incipient Jomon. Some sites dated many thousands of years ago, long before bronze pots clattered onto the scene. The numbers are for daytime voices. At the river, you only need the assurance that people were already pinching, levigating, and learning what kind clay feels like when the world was still very young. Around you, the social room opens while you work. Two diggers with baskets trade places at the cut, one scooping, one pinching. A cousin rinses the strainer and lays it to dry where sun and shade share the job. A child stands in shallow water, tasked with picking out mischievous twigs and triumphantly holding up each offender, as if saving dinner from tiny saboteurs. No one outranks anyone here. The job ahead, feeding a small crowd without scaring the pot, ranks everyone together. You set aside a tray of tempers, sand from a higher bar where grains feel rounder, crushed shell in flakes like small moons, and grog, which is ground sherd from a pot that did its years of service and now returns, wiser, to keep another vessel calm. Temper is not seasoning. You won't taste it. It is the neighbor you invite so the clay doesn't panic alone when heat knocks. Each grain interrupts shrinkage, spreads stress, and makes little pathways for heat to move without shouting. You fold only a little into this batch, just enough for the body to shrug instead of flinch, saving the real blending for later, when your tests tell you how much torque this clay needs. A fringe tidbit arrives like a wink from an older maker. The tongue truth is for sherds, yes, but for raw clay there's the wrist truth. Smear a thin slip on your wrist and fan it once. If it dries into tiny spiderwebs instantly, you've got a drama queen, either too fine or too thirsty. If it rests, then tightens with hairline smiles, your mix is on track for a wall that will dry even and fire kindly. It's not a lab instrument, but your wrist does not lie often. Historians still argue whether early collectors sought clays rich in shell fragments on purpose, knowing from long habit that shell-pocked bodies shrug off thermal shock, or whether they simply took what riverbanks offered and learned resilience by accident, adjusting tempers later when pots began to grumble. You let the debate talk itself into a circle and return to your bowl. Intention and experiment often share a bench and switch hats when no one is looking. You move along the bank to a cooler-colored cut, pinch again, and feel the difference immediately. This clay is fat with fine particles, plastic as a promise. Lovely for forming, likely to sulk in fire if left alone. You picture last night's gentle simmer, kettle steam strolling the corded terraces, and decide this batch needs a dash of sand to make it breathe. You sprinkle a measured pinch, fold, press, keeping your cadence steady so every handful gets the same quiet invitation to behave. By late morning, clay dust in sunbeams turns your workspace into a chapel of specks. You do not kneel. You cover. Cloth goes over bowls, because wind is both friend and gossip, and you prefer it as friend to day. You set 4 small tiles from different mixes in a row, scratch your little moon and dot date code, and leave them in the shade to begin their slow conversation with air. Later you will flex them when they are leather hard, listening for the dry whisper that means more sand, or the soft sigh that says, I'm strong enough. A small joke helps you keep patience. Someone always proposes pure clay for authenticity, and you picture serving soup in a sugar bowl. Authenticity without physics is just a costume. You grin at your own grumpiness and go back to folding. The coil on the board stretches without tearing. Good. The future rim you haven't formed yet thanks you in advance. Your feet take you farther upriver to a bend, where roots net the bank like a loom held sideways. You scoop a little of the grey underlayer and mix it with a thumb of yesterday's redder clay. The paste relaxes, as if 2 temperaments learn to share a bench. You try a ribbon test, draw a thin strip, and see how long it hangs before it breaks. It hangs, then bows, then breaks clean. You like that honesty. A clean break at the end of grace is what you want from a wall meeting heat. You rinse your hands and watch ripples widen in the gourd, as if the water were rehearsing your coil's future. The river is your patient teacher. It shows you settling, it shows you transport, it shows you how edges move towards center when left alone. You will steal all those lessons for the hearth. Spread attention, let things find level, avoid sudden applause. One more useful fact, set down like a pebble, not a proclamation. Many Jomon sites show that people didn't just grab one clay and swear loyalty forever. Assemblages carry different tempers and sources, a sign of choice, by season, by task, by what the river was in the mood to give. You are happy to belong to a tradition of practical shopping. By midday, the sun stare grows personal. You move your bowls back into palm leaf shade, a tool as important as any paddle. Shade slows edges, lets centers catch up, and prevents warps that turn bases into rocking chairs. You wring a cloth over one bowl and drape it like a cool thought. A cousin drops by with a handful of obsidian from a trade path inland. Later, you'll scrape rims with the flakes to fairness. Trade you chestnuts, you say. Trade accepted. She smiles. Markets will come in their own section, but their footsteps echo even here on the riverbank. You finish with rituals light enough to keep. Rub a dot of slip between finger and thumb until it strings like honey. If it snaps into crumbs, you're not there yet. Tap a dry test pellet against your tooth. A tiny click means density without brittleness. A dull thud means try again. Laugh at yourself for talking to dirt. Dirt talks back in its way. It just prefers whispers and gestures. When you finally shoulder the basket of prepared clay, the weight feels like future meals. You can already see lamp glow on a damp coil, the drum cadence of your thumbs as they press and lift, the diplomat paddle leaving texture that teaches steam to behave. The river's breeze follows you a little way, then lets you go. Sandal crunch returns along the path, and each soft step says what your fingers have been saying all morning. Be even, be patient, be kind. The pot will hear it later in the fire. So will anyone lucky enough to taste. Under palm leaf shade, you spread 2 cloths, like picnic blankets for earth, and the morning turns into a quiet tasting of textures. You level the board with a small wedge, no heroics, and set your bowls within easy reach. Levigated clay like slow cream, sand from the higher bar, round and polite, crushed stone in peppery flecks, a little grog, the ground-up wisdom of a retired pot, and a pinch of chopped plant fiber, pale threads that looked like short grass after rain. You breathe once, then let your hands become scales. No rush. A handful here is a sentence. A pinch there is punctuation. You fold temper into clay the way you fold cool air into a warm room, gently, with the door open so breeze can wander. With the heel of your hand you press forward, lift, turn, press, lift, turn. A steady drum cadence keeps you from hurrying the story. Grains glitter in the slip like stars hiding in fog, and your palms feel the difference immediately. Too little temper, and the paste clutches. Too much, and it crumbles like gossip that ran out of facts. You're looking for the middle path, the one where expansion under heat becomes a shrug instead of a gasp. Physics arrives like a lullaby you already know. Clay platelets slide and lock. Sand and grog interrupt shrinkage, so cracks can't draw a straight line. Crushed stone and shell, where you have it, lend body and tiny pathways for heat to share itself instead of shouting at one spot. Sure. Plant fiber, if you choose a breath of it, burns away in firing and leaves micropores. Little rest stops for steam. You don't recite the terms, you keep the mood. Spread attention. Leave room for heat to wander. Invite water to depart politely. You test with small rituals that keep anxiety off the table. Roll a coil as long as your hand and bend it around 2 fingers. If it smiles without frowning, your ratio is friendly. Flatten a wafer and flex it over your knuckles. If hairline lines appear like fine crow's feet but stop shy of tears, you're near the sweet spot. Draw a ribbon and hang it. It bows, surrenders, breaks clean, not ragged, not brittle. Good. A small joke sidles in before your jaw tightens. We're not baking bricks. We're making dinner calm. The clay pretends not to hear and behaves anyway. One clean fact to keep at arm's length like a trusted tool. Petrographic studies on many Jomon sherds show sand and crushed stone tempered bodies were common across regions and periods, with local mixes shifting by source and task. Some assemblages carry organic inclusions, and coastal pots in certain areas show occasional shell-derived tempers or shell fragments in the clay matrix. You don't turn the bench into a seminar, you just let the facts steady your hand. Choice has a history here, as old as stew. You ease a thumb of grog into the next batch and feel the paste relax, like a tense friend after a long exhale. Old-fired clay knows the fire's voice and teaches young bodies not to panic. Someone once nicknamed grog Grandmother Sand, and the name stuck in your head because it's true. It doesn't just stiffen, it counsels. A fringe tidbit you learned from an older maker. Toast the grog a breath in a shallow tray before adding, only a breath, so it drinks slip kindly instead of stealing it. Whether that's chemistry or charm, you have never seen it hurt. You sift the river sand through a woven sieve that hums as grains skitter across it, an accidental loom rhythm. Rounder grains behave differently than sharp ones. Round keeps the wall graceful when you coil, sharp can bite too hard and leave stress points, though sharp has its uses when you want a firm, squat pot to hold heat low and slow. You mix both in small, honest amounts, trusting that the stew you plan to make should choose the wall that plans to hold it. Fish broths with shells ask for a little more shrug. Nut pastes appreciate walls that grip without grabbing. Historians still argue whether temper decisions were driven mainly by what the riverbank handed out, by function under heat, or by social signaling. This village's sand, that family's grog, as if pots carried passports. You let the debate stretch its legs while your hands do the part debates can't. They listen to paste. In your small world today, function gets the loudest vote, availability the second, identity the quiet, confident tiebreaker that rides home in the pattern later. You keep shade as a tool. Clay that rests under palm leaf shade wakes kinder. You know this because impatient versions of you tried to hurry with midday sun and got rims that raced ahead of bellies, bases that turned into rocking chairs, and an evening of sighs you didn't need. So you cover each mixed parcel with a damp cloth and give it 5 slow breaths. When you return, the mass feels unified, like a room after people agree on the same song. The drum cadence on the bench returns, press, lift, turn, and bubbles surrender their little ambitions. Your body lends 2 extra instruments. First, the wrist thermometer. Rest the inside of your wrist on the paste. If it pulls heat greedily, it's too dry. If it feels clammy and leaves a slick, it's too wet. Balance is a wrist that forgets it's working. Second, the ear barometer. Knead near your cheek and listen. A fine, sandy purr means grains are sliding into place. A squeak means too much drag. Add a sip of slip and the squeak forgives you. You smile at the thought that your head has become a small lab. Congratulations. The equipment list: 2 ears, 2 wrists, 1 patient breath. A neighbor arrives with a gourd of beach sand, and a laugh that says you owe her a bowl later. The grains are salt-kissed, different under your thumb than river-bar sand. You rinse a handful to shake loose mystery salts, friendly in soup, less friendly in clay, and save that batch for squat pots that will live near coals, not high over flames. Practical markets make their own paragraphs inside your day. Materials travel even when people don't. Another tidy fact, small enough to tuck under the board. Middle Jomon, flame-style vessels from Niigata and nearby regions, dramatic rims dancing like frozen embers, often sit atop bodies whose fabric still reads workhorse under the microscope. Tempered, compressed, competent for simmering aquatic foods and nut pastes. As residue specialists love to remind anyone who asks what those pots actually did. Form can flirt, function has to feed people. Your mix today intends to feed. You set 4 test plaques, each labeled with a tiny scratch code, sand leaning, grog forward, mixed, fiber kissed, and lay them by a draft where air can stroll, not sprint. Later, leather hard, you'll bend each, listening for polite complaints. For now, you roll 2 coils from the mixed body, lay them together, and nip the seam. You tug lightly. When the join refuses to open, you nod. Staggered seams under compression are your future shield. A small joke taps your shoulder. Someone always asks for no temper, pure clay, purer spirit, and you picture serving hot stew in a sugar bowl again, then apologize to the sugar bowl. The board knows you're joking. The clay seems amused and lets the coils stretch another handspan without sulking. Plant fiber waits at the edge of your decisions like a helpful cousin. You fold a whisper of chopped grass into one small batch, no more than the lines on your palm, and knead until those threads vanish into the paste. You've used this trick when fuel was scarce and you wanted walls to dry quick and open tiny pores later. You also know the risk. Too much and the wall becomes a memory before it becomes a pot. You label the parcel with a notch you'll recognize blind and set it under shade like a shy guest at a party who'll shine after warming up. By midday, you have 3 kneaded loaves under damp cloths, each with a future. One for tall, gentle simmerers, one for squat keepers of ember heat, one experimental with a breath of fiber, destined for stews that steam long and quiet. You smooth each with the back of your hand and feel the temper glitter back at you as if to say, we're ready to share the work. Lamp glow will meet these soon. Paddle and stone will teach them to be single walls instead of stacked coils. Before you leave the shade, you whisper the simple rule that keeps your wrists honest. Let many small helpers do the job no single hero can. Sand helps. Grog helps. Fiber helps in careful amounts. Shade helps. Rest helps. Rhythm helps. You help by not getting clever. The paste glows softly, as if lamplight has already found it. You cover the bowls, breathe once more, and feel the room become modest and sure. When you lift the first loaf, it holds its shape and surrenders to your fingers exactly the way a future wall needs to, confident, forgiving, ready to meet heat as a conversation, not a fight. You set the kneading board across your knees and let the clay loaf rest under your palms until your breath and its temperature agree. Then you begin the wedging, press forward with the heel, fold, quarter turn, press, fold, turn, keeping a quiet drum cadence so your hands don't sprint where patience would walk. Air pockets are cheerful liars. You coax them out now so they don't try to become folk tales in the fire. The paste warms a touch, and the platelets line up like reeds combed by wind across a pond. You're not making bread, You tell your wrists with a smile. You're smoothing gossip into a testimony that will hold water and heat without drama. You pinch off a coil and roll it, not with frantic fingertips, but with the broad base of your fingers, letting the board give back a little resistance. Too thin and it tattles at every seam, too thick and it sulks into lumps. You aim for the weight of a thumb, the length of a forearm. You lift one end onto the base you made yesterday and seat it with a damp fingertip, then draw that fingertip along the join until the seam stops looking like two ideas and starts looking like one. The physics is bedtime easy. Clay forgives compression better than tension, so you build a wall that prefers hugging to pulling apart. Every 4 beats of the drum, your inner hand rises in a soft knuckle, your outer hand pinches and lifts, and the wall climbs a finger. You are your own anvil. The inside hand, the hill, the outside hand shapes against. When your knuckle tires, you swap to a smooth river stone that has lived in palm leaf shade, cool and persuasive. The stone fits your palm as if it remembers yesterday's temper test, and it does the same job as the knuckle without asking for a complaint. You check thickness with the wrist stethoscope, rest the side of your wrist against the wall as you turn the vessel. Where it feels cool longer, the wall is thick. Where your skin's warmth comes through fast, you mark a tiny nail nick and promise a sliver of extra coil next pass. Quirky? Yes. Also effective. You stagger each new coil's joint away from the one below, the way brickwork refuses to draw a straight line for cracks to run races on. Inside, you smooth with a slip-damp leaf in long, river-like strokes, because soup prefers glide to chatter. Outside, you keep the surface modest for now. Chord marks will come later. Just enough paddling with a plain beater to persuade lumps into citizens and to consolidate the wall into one even breath. Your beater is light. You call it the diplomat, not the judge. Heroic blows belong in poems, not in pots. One clean fact to prop beside the lamp. Through the long Jomon timeline, hand-building, especially coiling and paddling, was the ordinary way vessels grew, with the fast potter's wheel arriving much later in other periods. Many surviving sherds still show interior finger crescents and exterior paddle prints that betray these very motions. You don't need dates to feel kinship. The proof is under your fingertips where last night's simmer left a faint, seasoning skin that your smoothing leaf now respects instead of scraping. The room around you weaves its own loom rhythm. A friend taps the hollow log, the low beat keeping your breath even. Someone else hums a line that prevents your hands from speeding when the wall rises easily and from dawdling when the curve turns tricky. A child, promoted to seam spotter, points whenever a join tries to brag. Every point earns a laugh and a gentle press that teaches the wall humility. No gatekeepers here, only caretakers, each in turn. If a cousin with perfect eyesight arrives with obsidian flakes, you let them whisper the rim smooth when the time comes, knowing that edges love fairness. Your wall reaches the first shoulder, and you resist the urge to show off. Loud forms are magnets for mishap in fire. You let the belly swell with the calm of a kettle grown wise, then lean the upper wall inward, just a breath, already thinking of how modest rims escort condensate back to safety, instead of throwing parties for stray bubbles. When a coil tries to wander outward as if it saw a bird, you chuckle, nice try, and guide it home on beat 4. Architecture should not follow the migratory season. Physics stays mother tongue simple. Compression, good. Tension, negotiable, but not tonight. Even thickness spreads stress like kindness at a long table. Thin patches become gossipers in the kiln and shriekers over coals. You keep thickness honest by turning the pot a thumb's width every few minutes while you work. So, wind across courtyards cannot court just one side. A damp cloth drapes the lip during water breaks, and its weave, loom rhythm in fabric, reminds your eyes that straight lines look curved on a cylinder if you forget to measure with breath as well as sight. Your lamp throws shadows that become instruments. You tilt the vessel so light skims the outer skin. High spots announce themselves as bright boast, low spots brood in grey. You persuade both toward the middle with a rib and a palm. Another small joke keeps your jaw loose. You mutter that perfection is a loud dinner guest and evenness is a good cook. The pot pretends not to hear and rewards you with a surface that feels like a single decision. A fringed tidbit from an older hand gets its turn, the sesame roll. Drop a single seed inside the leather-soft pot and tilt. Listen to how it rolls. A smooth, even hush means the inner wall is fair. A tiny pause at the same angle twice means a bump that your fingers forgot. You fish out the seed, laugh at yourself for using pantry acoustics as a tool, and smooth the pause into a path. Your ear, it turns out, knows a lot about geometry. One more fact, light as ash on a fingertip. In some middle Jomon regions, Niigata and beyond, rims became theatrically flame-style, all flares and frozen tongues, while the bodies below remained honest, tempered, and coil-built for simmering. Residue work still often finds aquatic fats and nut pastes clinging in the microfilm, exactly the recipes your even wall prefers. Historians still argue whether those dramatic rims did practical work, catching lids, guiding condensate, or mostly signaled mood, feast, or identity. You let the argument sit by the warmest stone and be fed. Your own rim tonight leans modest, because dinner outranks costume at this hearth. You pause to mist your hands, not the wall, and pass that moisture into the surface with smoothing strokes. If the coil shines like a mirror, it's too wet and will slump. If it powders like chalk, it's too dry and will crack from jealousy. You keep that middle weather by moving your body with the pot, turn, breathe, press, so no side gets a private climate. When you step away, you dress the rim with a damp cloth, fringe tucked, and let lamp glow keep vigil. The cloth's small squares leave a ghost grid that vanishes as the lip equalizes. You read it as easily as ripples in a cistern, smoothing after a fingertip touch. Social roles weave through the last inches. The firekeeper cousin sets a tray at the far end where the pot will begin to dry under palm leaf shade. The waterkeeper refreshes the slip bowl with a pour that makes no splash. The seam spotter, now ambitious, asks to try paddling, and you pass the diplomat beater into small hands for 3 gentle taps. Tap, slide, tap. Enough to feel the way wood talks through clay to the stone in your palm inside. Apprenticeship here is a series of soft entrustings. By the time lamp glow fattens to amber, the vessel stands to your wrist bone, shoulders fair, wall even, rim planned but not embellished. You smooth the last thumbprint from the outside, and then place one deliberate fingerprint under the inner lip where only your washing hand will find it later, a future wink to remind you that patience works. You lift the board, feel the weight, and set the pot on a sand-dusted plank where air can stroll past without gossip. You rotate it once, a coin turn, so drying begins like a conversation instead of a lecture. As you clean the board, One last joke arrives to unclench whatever effort still hides in your neck. If anyone says, "Can't you just throw it on a wheel?" you grin and say, "I did. I threw it on my knees." The room pretends it hasn't heard that one 100 times. The pot, indifferent to comedy, begins its slow settle toward leather hard, coils asleep inside a single skin that will wake tomorrow ready for texture, ready for hearth geometry, ready for a simmer that asks for steadiness and receives it because you put steadiness into the wall, one measured breath at a time. You return to the leather-hard wall and feel how yesterday's evenness now asks for pathways, a quiet map you'll press into skin. You wet a short braid, stretch it between thumb and forefinger until it hums with a little loom rhythm, and tap it along the belly in slow, breathing strokes. The cord bites and releases, leaving shallow terraces like swell lines on a moonlit sea. In your mind, the ridges become starlight trails, small constellations your fingers draw so water and heat can read them later without getting lost. You keep the cadence you learned at the drum, not fast, not fussy, just steady enough that each band knows where to go and when to stop. You angle the bands so they climb gently toward the rim, never straight up, never straight across, always a slope a droplet can understand. When kettle steam condenses outside, it will bead on those tiny steps, then stroll home along the lines, instead of pooling and scolding a single patch. You work by lamp glow, turning the board a thumb width every few strokes so wind across courtyards can't flirt with only one side. Texture is not a costume tonight. It's plumbing for air and water. A simple physics lullaby underlies the motion. Increase surface area and you interrupt the clingy skin of moisture. Break that film into beads and evaporation stops being a tantrum and starts being a conversation. Make shallow ribs and you spread heat sideways. Stress goes from a shout in one corner to a calm, low meeting across the whole wall. Chord marks are microfins, tiny, helpful, unfancy. They turn flame's impulsive language into slow grammar your pot can live with. One clean fact settles like ash on the chord. Chord marking shows up across the incipient and initial Jomon layers over much of Honshu and Hokkaido, a common habit as old as the pottery itself, not some late fashion. Archaeologists have spent pleasant years labeling zones and angles. You take the point more simply. Lots of hands pressed ropes into clay for a very long time, and supper thanked them for it. You hum, and your fingers keep writing. The social room braids in, as it always does. Someone at your shoulder weaves fresh cord from plant fibers, fingers moving like a gentle song. A cousin dusts the braid in a pinch of ash so it won't cling. The firekeeper cousin angles a lamp so shadows skim the grooves, making highs and lows easy to read without touching. The seam spotter child, promoted, becomes the line watcher, calling out whenever a band wanders, as if it saw a star and forgot its job. Everybody's eyes belong to the same wall. No one's role is small when tomorrow's stew depends on these quiet roads. You bend to the lower skirt and press a closer pattern there, a denser field of little taps where the pot will meet air from the hearth doors. The dense stippling invites wind to brush under the belly like a polite guest, breaking up hot spots into a soft halo. You lighten your hand as you approach the shoulder, where slope needs to be clear more than crowded. A single shallow channel just under the inner lip, stroked with a shell, becomes your condensate lane, the tiniest garden path that walks droplets back to dinner. A small joke keeps your jaw relaxed. You are not giving the pot a sweater. You are giving steam a crosswalk. You smile at the line, mostly because it stops your fingers from overdoing it. Loud patterns are magnets for soot and pride. You prefer a murmur the fire will respect. When you accidentally stamp one band a shade too dark, you soften it with the side of a rib, then kiss the area with a damp leaf to lift the sheen back to calm. The wall forgives you. Clays are generous when you apologize quickly. You step away to feel the pattern with your wrist, a trick you trust more than sight. Where the ridges are consistent, your skin finds the same tiny hill again and again. Where you rushed, the hill hesitates or vanishes. You mark only the places that need attention, because touch wants a chance to finish the job without being crowded by your enthusiasm. Then you return to the rim and diagonal a softer band that will hold a leaf or lid steady without turning into a grit trap. Smooth inside for soups to glide, structured outside for hands to hold, and droplets to decide. Here's your fringe tidbit, delivered with a grin from an older maker. Keep a rain cord, a braid that sleeps in a cool gourd of water scented with a breath of pine. On hot afternoons, the chilled cord presses cleaner, the resins whisper, persuading fibers to release without grabbing, and the pattern crisps as if it practiced. Magic? Maybe it's just temperature and patience pretending to be cousins. You try it and the bands fall in line like good neighbors. Your hands know when to stop because sound tells you. Tap the cord wrap paddle very lightly and listen to the note rise from the skin. Dull means under-consolidated. Bright means over-eager. A middle hum means enough. You choose the hum. More marks do not mean more safety. They mean more soot to babysit later. You leave generous gaps where lids seat and where lugs will sprout tomorrow, because sharp junctions lure cracks like gossip in a crowded room. Another fact rests gently on the shelf. In some middle Jomon regions, potters raised dramatic flame-style rims, points and whirls like frozen embers, while the bodies below kept their practical corded surfaces. Residue studies still often find aquatic fats and nut pastes clinging in microfilms on those bodies, a quiet reminder that the show upstairs didn't cancel the work downstairs. The wall you're touching is the downstairs, unshowy, dependable, meant for a lifetime of simmer. Historians still argue whether particular band angles, chevrons, and nested patterns mainly improved cooling and grip, signaled group identity, or whispered seasonal stories you can't translate anymore. You let the question do its slow dance and keep pressing the useful lines. Function and meaning are not enemies. They've shared benches since people first wrapped rope around wood. You turn the pot so starlight from the doorway sneaks across the grooves and they blur into tone, just enough sparkle to catch a wet hand, not enough to snag a cloth. Somewhere outside the night rehearses the swell, and the analogy returns. The ocean moves best in long, legible patterns. Break the swell into chop, and boats complain. Your pot is the opposite. Break the outside sheen into tiny, legible ribs, and heat and water stop complaining. Different elements, same courtesy. Write the pattern they need to behave. You add a small ring of dots near the base. Your private makers wink because you'll read it later when soot tries to pretend you forgot where to clean. You dust the wall one last time and the grooves laugh quietly in lamp glow. The line watcher gets a conspiratorial nod. The cord weaver coils the rain cord back into its cup. Somewhere the fire sighs, happy that it will not be asked to shout. To finish, you cradle the board and carry the vessel back to palm leaf shade. Shade, again, is a tool. It slows drying so ridges don't tilt toward the door and walls don't learn private weather. You set the pot down on sand-dusted plank, rotate it once, and listen to the room settle. The pattern does what it should. It disappears into the hole until water or hands or heat arrives to read it. In the distance, a child tries out your line, crosswalks for steam, and earns a small wave of laughter. Good. The joke will keep someone gentle when haste wants to push. You wash the braid in a bowl, watching ripples in a cistern-calm circle widen and fade, and you realize that's what the chord marks are for. To turn sharp points into circles, to let everything spread and return without fuss. You hang the paddle by its thong, leave the workbench tidy, and sit a moment with your back to the door so the breeze can shoulder past and carry the clay's faint scent along. Tomorrow you'll speak to wind and stone. Tonight you've given water a language it understands. The wall, printed with quiet starlight and little swells, is ready to meet the fire without flinching. You kneel by the hearth and make a little city for flame and air. 3 stones like quiet buildings, an ash lane between them, 2 doorways where breeze can stroll instead of shove. Think courtyard, not bonfire. Wind across courtyards behaves when you give it paths. The pot behaves when you refuse to surprise it. You set the first stone so its shoulder fits the pot's skirt, the second to find level with it, the third to complete a tripod, the old truth that 3 points agree even when the ground argues. You smooth an ash cushion under the working zone, a pale blanket that turns sharp radiance into soft halos, and you leave a clear hallway beneath the belly so convection can do what it already loves. Rise, invite, replace, repeat. You build the fire in layers, not heaps. A wisp of kindling at the upwind door, stouter twigs toward the leeward, a polite gap so heat can gather without headbutting clay. Radiation warms what it can see, conduction warms what it touches, convection moves warmth around without drama. 3 short sentences that keep dinner from turning into a life lesson. With a pinch of ash, you test your plan. Sprinkle, watch. If ash drifts smoothly beneath the pot and exits the leeward door like a cat with places to be, you're close. If ash sulks in a corner, you widen the upwind mouth a thumb's width and try again. Small motions, big manners. A clean fact to place like a 4th stone. Large middle Jomon sites, such as Sannai-Maruyama in northern Honshu, show clay or stone-lined hearths inside pit dwellings, many of them mapped like the heartbeat of the settlement. Cooking fires weren't occasional guests, they were roommates. You don't chant dates at the coals, you let the idea warm your spine. Other hands solve this nightly puzzle for centuries, so panic is optional. You arrange 2 zones, one where the pot will work, another off to the side where wood preheats and coals rest. A kind stove has a waiting room. You drag a glow here, nudge a sparkle there. With a flat stick you comb the ash into ripples, a Zen garden for hungry people, because little waves underneath turn hot dots into a calm sky. The pattern isn't for art, it's for evenness. When you set the pot on its tripod shoulders, it sits as if it always lived there, the way a good chair never reminds you it's a chair. Social roles thread into the glow. The firekeeper cousin, patient wrists, ash freckles, tends the doorways, easing a twig, lifting a coal, listening to the hush. A child becomes door watcher, eyes on the upwind gap, calling out if a gust gets ideas. A neighbor breaks longer, sticks into handspan lengths. Long sticks make arguments, short sticks make dinners. Someone hums a low line, not quite a drum cadence, just enough to stop your hands from doing something brave and regrettable. No rank, only braid. You swivel the pot a finger's width now and then, a courtly turn that spreads attention around the skirt. Your rim leans modestly inward, yesterday's plan, preparing to escort any enthusiastic bubbles back into the story instead of onto your feet. The corded terraces you pressed earlier are earning their supper. Outside beads gather, read the slope, stroll home without scolding a single spot. Inside, stew moves like a crowd with good manners. No elbows. A fringed tidbit earns its place. The whistler pebble. Tuck a flat stone just inside the leeward door. If airflow is balanced, gases slip past, and the pebble sings the faintest note, a sound you can hear only when you are listening for kindness. It's physics wearing a charm's coat. When the hum arrives, your shoulders forget to be heroic. If it oversins, you narrow the door. If it's mute, you widen a hair. Historians still argue whether certain stone sets found near hearths were dedicated tripods, multi-purpose stands, or fixtures that carried more social meaning than thermal function, cooking supports that were also signals. You let the argument sit by the warmest place and feed it a polite twig. Your own supports tonight are stubbornly practical. They ask only for level and forgive only with grace. The physics stays bedtime simple. If one patch blushes too fast, it is a social problem in miniature, too much attention in one corner. You diffuse it with two moves. Nudge a coal from directly under that spot, comb a little more ash across the bright patch, then rotate the pot a breath. If the stew sulks, laying a sleepy skin on one side, you give that side the leeward kiss of warmer air by shifting a coal into its hallway. No clanging, no scolding. Make many small mercies. Avoid the grand gesture. Grand gestures are terrific in songs, unhelpful in kitchens. The room offers its jokes to keep your jaw easy. First, a hearth is a wind instrument that happens to make soup. Blowing like a blacksmith only teaches clay to resent you. Second, the third stone is always a diva. You flatter it with a slip of sand, and it finally agrees to be level. Third, if someone suggests more fire, faster dinner, you hand them a raw chestnut and wish them luck. You notice that the air itself has seasons. Tonight's breeze smuggles lake cool into the doorways. In high summer, it will swagger differently. In snow time, you'll build the ash blanket thicker and aim the upwind mouth south of the usual. Hearth geometry is never one diagram. It's a family of manners that change outfits with the weather. You keep a mental ledger. 2-door wide on damp nights, ash comb deeper when chestnut paste thickens, tripod narrower when the pot is squat. The ledger turns into habit, habit turns into calm. One more fact, low as an ember. Some Jomon contexts preserve clay bars or ring stands, portable ideas for lifting pots and guiding air, proof that supports traveled and morphed with tasks. People made furniture for fire. You extend the thought to your own set. A small clay spacer under one stone becomes a micro-adjuster. A sand pinch under another stops a wobble from becoming a rumor. The pot thanks you in its language. It does not click. You watch the line between glow and shadow under the belly and learn its slow breathing. When it creeps higher on one side, you read it like ripples in a cistern and make the smallest move. A coal the size of an almond, drag 2 finger widths. The line relaxes. The pebble hums again. Somewhere behind you, sandal crunch in the passage hints at a cousin arriving with dry twigs. And you remember that markets live inside houses too, small exchanges, quiet barter between one job and the next. A debate wanders back in, and you let it. Historians still argue whether hearth placements inside large pit dwellings were mainly for cooking, also for warmth and light, or deeply set for gatherings where food, story, and ritual braided so tightly that separating them is more a scholar's wish than the past's reality. You decide, as you lay one last stick on, that the stew knows the answer. It feeds people while lighting faces, and the clay enjoys being the reason everyone lingers. You finish by doing less. Doors aligned, ash combed, tripod settled, flame's voice lowered to inside voice. The pot sits, a guest of honor who doesn't need fussing. When you stir, it's with the back of the ladle, a polite nudge at the bottom, and a lift straight up, no clacking. When you taste, you do it while listening for that pebble's barely there song. The hearth has become a courtyard with agreed-upon paths. Air walks them. Heat follows. Clay stays kind. Supper happens. Now the glow leans inward and softens, the two little doorways, trading breath so quietly that the room forgets there was ever a plan, only an ease. The ash you combed becomes level ground without edges, and under the pot a warm hush settles where bright points used to argue. The pebble's faint hum thins to almost nothing, the sort of almost sound that makes shoulders loosen and eyes half close. You draw slower air in through your nose and let it leave like a satisfied sigh. And in that long exhale, the courtyard of this hearth turns wide as the night itself, paths untroubled, corners rounded, no hurry anywhere. The corded ridges you pressed earlier hold little beads that make their slow return without asking for notice, and the rim keeps its promise to send everything home. Outside, the lane is quiet. Inside, lamp glow lays soft borders on the floor and the stones, so that even their shapes seem gentler than before. Let the ladle rest. Let the doors rest. Let your own hands rest. The pot is safe, the stew is steady, and the warmth travels just far enough to touch you and then stay. You are carried by a silence that cooks without needing anything more.